Right, there we go. So the first thing to say, Femi, is thank you very much for letting me do this. This is really, really helpful for us all. So your job title is you're Director of Employability and Enterprise?
Student Enterprise, yes.
Student Enterprise. So I guess it's the employability bit that I'm most interested in. And I guess my first question is, can you tell me a little bit about what employability is?
Well, if you look at the literature, there's some quite kind of nice definitions of employability that I suppose fit into that kind of intellectual box. But when I talk to students or people about employability, I say it's the ability to get a job, keep a job, progress in that job, get a different job, or create your own job, which is where enterprise comes into it. So it is part of employability. It's just you're creating your own job, and with any luck, you'll be creating jobs for others. So to me, that's the piece.
So it's a real lifelong thing.
Yes.
And it's about the skills you need to kind of manage.
In the past, you would say manage your career.
Yeah.
But because now people don't have careers in the old way, or the way people thought about careers.
Yeah.
I've got this set of skills that I will deliver through a particular curriculum, whether it be law or business and accounts, and that is my dream, and that's where my career is going to go. Mm-hmm. Because of the nature of the labour market now, people have to really think of their curriculum learning and the skills that come out of that as something that they'll be able to translate into a number of settings. Okay. So that's why, in a way, even though job does sound a bit final, it is about that job that you get and how you kind of utilise your skills there, and then how you maybe use those skills to get a better job or even a different job, because those skills should be transferable. So that jobs for life, that traditional, this is my career trajectory, I think is changing so much. And also, because of the market now, create your own job is becoming so much more prevalent, because graduates are thinking, I'm going to be unemployed, what could I do for myself? And also with a group of friends, what could we do together or for others? So I think, excuse me, it's just the way the market and times are changing.
Yeah. And in part, is that since the recession, that sort of...
No, I think it's been going on for some time. And I also think it's, in a way, always been there.
Yeah.
You know, I still say to people I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, because I started off as a biochemist.
Okay.
And so I think there have always been those people who start off doing one thing, and more than people think, and end up doing so many other things. I think it happens to more people than people like to think of.
Yeah.
Even those people who started off doing something that's very prescriptive, like medicine, can then end up being comedians. So.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So, I guess thinking from a sort of policy perspective, do you feel that there was a real need, or perhaps why do you feel that there is a need for a policy in higher education that focuses on employability?
Because employers are so much more aware in terms of the graduate market. Years ago, there weren't so many graduates. They were kind of like special, and not everybody could get one, you know. Whereas now there's a real overbalance. There's so many graduates. Yeah. And that's made employers think about, well, what is this graduate? What is this product? And in fact, if we're going to buy this thing, we can say more about what it should be like, because it's a buyer's market. There's a lot of product. We can influence much more what that's going to be about, and consequently, they kind of have thought about what does a graduate mean to me and my business, and I think that has changed. I think because of the supply. Yeah. Also because government policy over the last, I would say, 20 years has been about skills. If we're gonna stay ahead in the world market, it's all about skills, and also it's all about higher level skills. Especially in somewhere like the UK, where you've moved from a manufacturing base. Really, we don't have those industry skills required as much. Maybe technical skills now. Maybe high-level technical skills, but not that we're this mass manufacturer of fabric or steel or all of those kinds of things. And so it's been a concentration on high-level skills. And because of that, you then takes you into the graduate market.
Okay, so for a number of reasons, what employers are looking for in a graduate is different now from what it was a generation ago.
I think probably not, but I just think that they can be more picky about it.
Okay.
Because when there's a small supply, you kind of all fighting, and also if you're not really sure there's not been a lot of dialogue, there's not been a lot of discussion about what this supply is and what it should do. I think that, as I said, there have been lots of government policy documents about it. I think employers are much more aware about it. So, but I do think some of the things have always been the same, because it's kind of their skills and they're also attitudes. And I think sometimes what the employers are talking about is attitude to employment rather than just the skills. Attitudes to their business, attitudes to the students' own kind of development and their own awareness of work. I think that sometimes employers are talking about that rather than just the skills and what they feel a graduate should be now.
So I'm going to ask you to say a little bit more about that, and I'm perhaps asking you the question in a slightly broader way. So what do you think the gaps are? I mean, in terms of employability, what do you need to focus on in order to produce these graduates that the employers want?
Somebody who has some commercial awareness, somebody who has a can-do attitude, somebody who has an entrepreneurial approach to work, can use their initiative, problem solve, somebody who understands the broader, not just can say I've worked in a team, but actually understands what working in a team means in terms of give and take, compromise, sharing of skills, that kind of thing. Things that you may not have deeply have got into by just doing a project with somebody at work. Also, an understanding of if you have done some other things, if you have worked in retail or you have worked in some other environment other to the environment you want to go into, how what you've learned in those environments can make you very attractive to your employer of choice. I think that the attitude and behaviours, really being hungry for that graduate role, because I think quite a few employers think that graduates think, well, this is what I deserve. It's
an entitlement.
And it's kind of like, get a job, mate, because I deserve it. Whereas employers are thinking, you know what, there's hundreds of you out there. I'm looking for that person who can add value to my business. And I think that if you're not also from the group that the employer normally deals with, or maybe their first choice. So if you're an employer that maybe really wants to recruit from the 12 top Russell Group institutions, if you're not from there, how do you present yourself as a graduate as an attractive option? Because every hire is a risk, and I tell students and graduates this a lot. Every time as an employer makes a hire, it's expensive. Getting it wrong is even more expensive. So actually, it's a risky business. And a lot of the tests and assessments that employers have put in place in the recruitment process for their graduates is really about low risk. They want to be able to take risk out of that decision and know that, well, if I ask for a 2-1, if they've done verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, if I've, and then also if I've looked at the school they went to, if I've looked at the university they've been to, all it does is lower the risk. And part of your job, in a way, as a graduate, if you're from a non-traditional background, is to prove to the employer that you're not a risk. And I always say to my graduates and students, when I got the job here, probably at that time, I was probably going to be the first BAME head of service in the UK, probably at that time, 10 years ago. I was an unusual suspect. So my job on the day was to lower the risk. How could I demonstrate to this panel that I wasn't a risky choice? And so that's about preparation, it's about knowledge of your area, it's about being able to demonstrate the skills that you have that go with the job that you're going for. And that happens at every level. So I think that understanding how employers think, understanding the market is huge, and that you're part of the supply, and the demand side can make demands because the supply is so huge. I think that understanding is really important. So graduates need to start thinking about that when they're undergraduates in year 1. Wait until year 3 is far too late.
Too late. Can I go back to one thing you said in sort of in the middle of that, which is about this idea of motivation and the fact that they need to be kind of hungry for the, really, really motivated for that particular job. And I just wonder how do you instill that motivation in an undergraduate?
I think in order to do that, undergraduates need to know what the score is. And I think one of the things that maybe we as institutions don't make clear enough is actually what they've signed up for, and if they want this particular outcome, the type of attitudes and behaviours they need to exhibit. I think that because of what happened in probably the 90s, 2000s, when there was this whole thing around we need 50% of our young people to go, or people to go into higher education, and if people go into higher education, they will earn all of this money, they're going to earn so much more than people who don't go into higher education. So that's where that kind of entitlement came into it. If I do this, I will end up with lots of money, I will be one of these special people. And out of that, I think that kind of took, in some ways, the motivation and the hunger out of it, and also in some ways a bit of the joy. So I think that young people or anybody at an institution needs to be told what the deal is. That an employer, as I say, it's an expensive thing to hire somebody. And I think sometimes people need to put themselves in the place of the employer. Not any employer, but a small employer. And say, well, actually, this hire, my mortgage is on the line, or my rent or whatever. So actually, it's really important. And will I take somebody on who doesn't show me that they're interested in me? Obviously, I want to be interested in them, but actually, they need to be interested in me. They need to be interested in my business, and they need to show me how they're going to add value. And so I think we need to raise the awareness of how employers currently think, and how actually you would think if you were an employer.
Yeah. Okay. So the whole employability agenda has been quite a sea change within higher education institutions, and the old paradigm was all about careers services and careers, and careers is now part of your remit. But I just wonder if you could talk a bit about how you see careers fitting with employability. How do the two work together?
I think that, I suppose it depends on how you really think about careers. Traditionally, careers, you went to your careers advisor, you said, I want to do criminal law, how do I go about it? And I'll have a conversation with you about it, and then I'll reflect on that conversation. You probably give me some leads about, you can go and read this, get this book, or you might think about this or that. Employability is really more about, so you want to be a criminal lawyer, what type of chambers might you, or what type of practices will you approach? How could you get 2 weeks work experience there? How would you go about doing that? How would you then reflect on that experience in terms of your work? And I think that the employability is much more really about how are you going to get the practical knowledge and experience to be able to progress in the direction you want to go. And also, what are the wider skills that practice might expect of you, apart from your understanding, first of all, your motivation to be a criminal lawyer, but also past your understanding of the nuts and bolts of what that entails academically. So actually, in my practice, it starts at 8:30 in the morning, and I expect everybody to be there at 8:30. Can you manage that? Are you going to think, my goodness, that's a bit much, And also, everybody in this particular practice dresses like this, because that's the image we want to present to our customers. Do you have an awareness that that kind of thing might happen to you?
Employability feels a bit more. Is it a bit more practical than careers?
I think the two of them are closely connected. I just think traditionally the careers was about something that you wanted to do that was very specific in some ways.
Yeah.
Employability is more about the skills that would allow you to work in any environment.
Okay, so going back to this idea of lifelong and transferable.
Yes, so these are your wider skills. And you can use those in the context of the sector or the environment you want to work in. Okay.
So one of my sort of personal concerns about employability, or questions really perhaps, is that I think a lot of the rhetoric around employability presupposes that students know what it is they want to do. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. In your experience, do they know what they want to do? And if they don't,
I don't think...
how can employability help them, I suppose?
I don't think people necessarily know what they want to do. But I do think that one thing that has changed probably over the last 30 years is why people have come into higher education. The majority have come because they want to economically change their circumstances economically. They really want to get a better job. And in the past that wasn't necessarily the focus. Your focus, I remember when I did my course, I just was really interested in science. I thought it was fantastic. I wanted to be a researcher. And I didn't even think about the job or the pay or anything like that.
So it's real intrinsic motivation. You wanted to study because you wanted to study.
Exactly. But I think that has changed dramatically. Students now think, well, actually, and their parents are making this massive investment in myself, or my parents are helping to make this massive investment in me as well. And at the end of it, I expect to get a well-paid job, a graduate-level job. And so I think that means that if you're going to do that, you have to be employable. And so just having conversations around what you want to do won't necessarily fill that gap. So if you're going to be employable, you need to understand how the workplace works. As I say, you need to have the right attitudes, you need to have the right behaviours, you need to have some understanding of a particular sector, how people recruit to it. It becomes a bit of a wider conversation if at the end of your 3 years your expectation is to get a job. And also, I suppose, if you're not in that conversation, people will make the assumption perhaps that you may want to join the academy. But even if you want to join the academy, you still need to understand now what that means. You know, there are lots of places that now have 3-year contracts that are looking at lecturers on performance, how many people pass the exam. It's a business. And so I just think the nature of work has changed, the nature of employment has changed, people's expectations out of degrees has changed because they want jobs, and therefore that shift from those nice conversations about your academic achievement and where you might like to go in terms of your career, those conversations have really, really changed to tell me how I can get this job.
So do you feel that students in the main part don't need to have those conversations about what do you want to do, either because they're there on their own, or... I
think they still desperately need those conversations, but I feel what's happened to career service or employability services and to universities is the number of students has gone up exponentially. So where as a service, people will get measured on outputs or outcomes, and those individual career guidance conversations, unless you've got a huge team of people, take up time and don't deliver the outcomes necessarily in terms of your employment performance indicator that the Vice Chancellor or the senior management team will be looking for. So it's not that approach isn't valuable, I think it's incredibly valuable. Even now I think that I'd love to have a conversation about what do I do next, how can I use my experience, how can I think about think constructively and critically about what I maybe would like to do next.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me now would be a valuable conversation. But if as a director of service, I look at my team, I look at how much time I've got, and I look at how I have to demonstrate in terms of throughput and outcomes to senior management the worth of my service. And if I look at that, then other things that are seem more tangible in terms of helping people get employment after they leave, like mentoring, volunteering, all of that I do and I understand piece becomes much more important to me in terms of delivering the needs of the institution, and also because the institution is accountable to HEFCI or HESA or whatever, helps them in their accountability to these agencies.
So it's really policy at many levels, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Right, my last few questions, because we're nearly at the end, are just around, I suppose, frameworks and theories. And I suppose the first one is about, are there employability frameworks that your staff use that sort of allow them to know what topics to focus on? Are there frameworks that they use?
I would say yes and no. I think because we're kind of a generalist, because we're so small, we have to be generalist in our approach, which is really, really not necessarily what I would like if I had more resources. I'd like to be much more specific in my approach. And in some ways, because we don't deliver an employability curriculum either in the schools, which they do in some institutions, where I would have somebody who was maybe a specialist in the arts who would go in and deliver a module maybe over 6 weeks or 12 weeks in a particular school. I think if you're doing that, I think a framework would be incredibly important. Because we're not doing that, and what we have to take, as I say, a generalist approach. What we've done is, I suppose, break down what the things that we feel are most relevant and important to students in terms of getting employment, either while they're studying or when they're finished. So it is really kind of the same menu as a lot of people would be familiar with: CVs, covering letters, understanding about assessment centres, understanding how people recruit in these days. And I would say, rather than a framework, what we've tried to do is take different approaches so that we can cover different learning styles to how we tell students about these things that we feel they need to know. So we have lots of online resources, and we have opportunities to come to workshops, and we have opportunities to see people one-to-one. So I would say we have objectives in terms of how the institution wants employability delivered long-term, and how it wants to be seen as an institution around employability and enterprise. We work within that, and our objectives in terms of how we work are set in that. But we're still using, I would say, that menu of things that we know will help people get jobs. And I think also we've tried to be creative by using employers where we can, by using different venues. So I always try to do things not on campus. I try to use employers' venues. So I think that if we, as a service, what we're probably well known for is doing the bread and butter things, but not necessarily in the traditional way, and also taking into account a kind of diverse student body and their needs.
And that's based on, so the sort of topics that you end up doing is based on your knowledge of employers and what they want, or on the sort of demand from students and what they come along to?
I think that sometimes, when students get to university now, I think they have a massive reality check. They thought that, oh my goodness, all I have to do is get my degree and there'll be a queue of employers waiting to take me, because that's what I've been told. If I make this investment in myself, that's all I have to do. And then they get here and suddenly they have people like me banging on saying, oh, you really need to get some work experience, you really need to improve your confidence. You need to be able to interview. You need to be able to present. So it's quite a kind of a tall order for them when they kind of get here. But I do. If I try and track back to your question, which was sorry.
So it's kind of about how you know what to focus on.
Employers, definitely.
So it's the employers that say.
Students do ask sometimes, but to be honest, it's employers because they're the people. Because it's a demand side situation. They're in charge. Without letting the students know how employers think and what they do, I think they're really disadvantaged. So when I say to students, an employer on the whole has maybe 45 seconds to scan their CV because they have got on their desk maybe 80. And if there are 80 CVs on my desk, and in terms of typographical errors, in terms of spelling mistakes, in terms of use of grammar, of those 80, 20 are perfect, absolutely perfect. I've scanned them, and I haven't necessarily absorbed all the content yet, but they are absolutely perfect. And the other 60, some have 3 mistakes, some have 5 mistakes, some have 1 mistake. Why am I going to look at them at all? I am only going to consider the 20 that are perfect.
Okay, sorry, that was just a funny noise. I'm not quite sure what's happening with my...
That is how employers behave, but the majority of students don't know that. They're heartbroken when they think that with 1 mistake on it, their CV could end up in the bin. But I talk to employers and I know that's what they do. And so everything that I feel students really need to know how employers think. They need to know that when you go for an interview, the employer is probably going to go to the receptionist after you've all come up for your interviews and say to the receptionist, what were they like? How did they talk to you? How did they treat you? The students concentrating on how can I impress the panel. The employer's going to ask the receptionist, how did they treat you? How did they talk to you? Were they polite?
Yeah.
Many students don't know that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So those are the things that students need to know because the market's so saturated.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So my last one, Femi, is just about theories, I suppose, career theories and learning theories, and whether or not career theories and learning theories you feel that they have any bearing, I suppose, on what you do within the employability service.
Absolutely. We still use those careers theories in what we do, and sometimes when we're constructing materials, we still go back to how those theories, how we should conduct guidance or enterprise one-to-ones. We still do go back to practice because, to me, employability actually is still part of learning and teaching. Yeah. We are practitioners, even though we may not all be careers advisor trained. We are all practitioners, and there is we do need to think about research and academic theory in what we're doing. So it isn't we're not just Job Centre Plus. You do need to reflect on what students you do need to reflect on the research in your area, what people are saying, not just in hearsay, but really based on what's going on in the sector. So we've just done a research intern, do some research on students' attitudes to engaging with employability services and academics' attitudes. And it's been really a rich piece of work on which now we can say, well, we're going to change our service based on this research. So for me, theory and practice should always come together. It shouldn't just be we feel like doing this. And I like to see myself as a practitioner, and also I do feel there's learning and teaching should encompass employability. It's not a bubble on the outside. It is about even when you ask a student to be a mentee, they're mentored for 6 months. How did they critically reflect on that experience? How what have they learned?
Yeah.
How are they going to use this learning in practically, and how can that learning improve their academic progress? So I do think it isn't. I think that before, especially careers professionals, felt we're careers professionals. Who are these employability people? Did they just blow from bus stops in Hackney? What do they know? No. Actually, it is still around practice.
Yeah.
And probably there isn't maybe enough discussion around that, because there was this whole thing called careers education, and then there were these interlopers called employability specialists or whatever.
Who do they think they are?
You know what I mean? But actually, it is around practice, and that's why, as I say, even when I think about the practical things I want students to do, it is based on I do and I understand, and the fact that there's a whole body of evidence that says people learn from doing.
Yeah. So are there any, because that's obviously that sort of experiential learning is a big, that's a big thing in education theory, isn't there? Are there any other particular career theories that your staff would rely on?
I suppose docs, they would still use that. I suppose I'm not a career specialist myself, so I wouldn't be able to necessarily quote what they do, but I know that they will think about things. So, for example, we've just developed a thing called a careers health check, which is based on careers theory, and students have to start asking themselves a particular set of questions around their career motivations, what they want to do next, and then to go with that is a careers prescription, which then tells them the particular activities they need to take part in, having done this careers health check, ask themselves questions. And so I think, as I say, we will, within any kind of activity, there has to, for me, be practice, especially when you're working in an educational setting. And even when you go, if you, I suppose, think back about education and what we're trying to achieve, we are trying to achieve some kind of equality and balance for all, and access for all around. Everybody should be able to get that opportunity to learn, to progress, to reflect on where they want to go in their lives. And maybe that has got a bit lost in all the rhetoric that has happened around education over the last 20 and 30 years, and because of the massification, also because of the money associated with education, it has made it a commodity rather than something that, I suppose, came from a deeper place, as people would like to think. But you can still hang on to those kinds of principles within your service, because you bring yourself back to the learner, and what value will the learner get out of this, and how are you adding value, and also how are you enabling them to realise their ambition. If their ambition is to improve themselves economically, how do they do that and become more enriched and understand themselves a lot more? How are they much more self-aware at the end of that process?
That's brilliant. Thank you very, very much.